they make the top three, they get a $250,000 bonus. And if they win, they get an extra $500,000 on top of all the other money they're going to win.
How much are you out? How much have you lost? At least $1 million?
I want him in jail because of what he's done to me.
They were dealing with an offshoot of one of the largest cheating operations in poker history. What if I told you the biggest sharks in poker never even sat at the table? Over $1 billion vanished, not through bad beats, but through some of the most outrageous scams poker has ever seen. From rigged software to full-blown Ponzi schemes, here are the 5 biggest poker scams of all time. Number 1. The Full Tilt Poker Scam. Learn, chat, and play with the pros. If you were ever near a television, magazine, radio, or almost anywhere in the mid-2000s, you could not escape that slogan. In fact, almost immediately, even if you weren't in the poker industry, you knew the familiar red logo of Full Tilt Poker. This site came out of nowhere to take the poker world by storm, only to come crashing down in just as fantastic fashion. This is the rise and fall of Full Tilt Poker. Ray Bitar, a former day trader, and Chris Ferguson, an accomplished poker pro, were introduced to each other in the early 2000s. Together, they became the masterminds for the site that came to be known as Full Tilt Poker. Ray Bitar, a savvy marketer, realized that if the company was going to have any longevity in a highly competitive market, it would need a logo that transcends the poker world. He and the founders spent months working with agencies to come up with a logo that was not poker related. Many of their competitors had poker chips incorporated into their branding. Bitar wanted the logo to have more of a Nike feel to it, one that would not need the name to be recognized. Finally, they settled on the red triangle that was featured behind the name of the company. The Play Money version of Full Tilt was launched in June of 2004. It was such a success that the real money version of the game was available only a month later. The site operated under the software development and licensing company Tiltware, hence where their name derived from. Not only did these professionals promote the site, but they also played on the site as well, giving average players from all over the world an opportunity to compete against the pros, an innovative idea at that time that was exclusively done by Full Tilt Poker. Players from all over the world opened up accounts with Full Tilt, which led to the company's early growth. After a year of steady growth, Full Tilt Poker underwent a major revamping in 2005. By focusing on these changes players wanted most, based on feedback received over the year of its launch, Full Tilt was quickly able to spread its wings and cover the entire online poker landscape, competing with long-standing #1 poker giant PokerStars for the top spot in terms of traffic. With the seemingly deep pockets of their investors, they continued to spend massive amounts of money on branding exercises and even more on their growing pool of sponsored players. First, there was the official Team Full Tilt. This was comprised of the founders and some of the most recognizable faces in the industry like Mike Matusow and Cloney Gowan. These players were paid a fee by the site to wear gear and appear in the ads and other promotions that the site put on for their players. Next, there were the Red Players, a series of players who had their screen name in a different color on the site when they were playing. These players were not paid fees, but they were more likely given some money to play with on the site and given a generous amount of rakeback in exchange for their play.
For representation at the main event, particularly if they make the final table, they get a $100,000 bonus. If they make the top three, they get a $250,000 bonus. And if they win, they get an extra $500,000 on top of all the other money they're going to win.
All of the spending and the overall strategy was working, and by the end of 2005, Full Tilt Poker had grown to be the 4th largest site in the market and showed no signs of slowing down. At this point, amateur players wanted to learn poker from the best, so having Howard Lederer, Chris Ferguson, and Phil Ivey essentially giving playing lessons on TV was a dream come true for many. Ray Bitar definitely wanted to be the largest player in the space, and this bravado was evident whenever he was found to be at an event. Flashy parties were the norm for Bitar, and the site, it seemed as though, was rolling in profits. As it turned out, the site was indeed making a significant amount of money, and Bitar thought it made sense to dole out some dividends to the original founding members. Millions were given out to the players, leaving very little margin above the player balances. A couple of the founders were allegedly against this idea. They felt it was better to hold on to the money to pour back into their now massive marketing costs. However, Ray Bitar was determined to spread the wealth, and the payments continued. Following the UIGEA in October of 2006, Full Tilt Poker had managed to stay in its market, but complications started to rise in the midst of 2007. A board member had quit due to the unforeseen magnitude of what the site had become, and Full Tilt was consistently in the crosshair of serious lawsuits. One previous sponsored player, Cloney Gowan, had said that she had been promised a 1% share in the company during the course of 2008 for her promotional efforts and endorsements for the site. However, the lawsuit was not taken anywhere. Other accounts during 2009 suggested that Chris Ferguson was involved in unlawful business practices averse to the UIGEA. 2009 was the beginning of a car crash for Full Tilt Poker. Players had started to sue the company for unlawfully taking funds from their account. Again, lawsuits were not given much attention, but Full Tilt was starting to get a bad name for itself. Meanwhile, the company was releasing their pros from their sponsorships, which was seen as a clear breakdown of the site from the eyes of the public. The story that really showed the financial struggle of the company was when a player had won $1 million from the site, yet Full Tilt had withheld the payout with no explanation. They were obviously broke by this point. Everything seemed to be looking up for Full Tilt until that dreadful day on April 15th, 2011, when Full Tilt Poker and every other poker site that was still serving US customers had their domain seized by the US government. This day later came to be known as Black Friday, and it was this day that Full Tilt Poker finally decided to stop allowing US players to play at their site. 5 days later, Full Tilt Poker reached an agreement with the Department of Justice stating that they could regain use of their domain in order to repay US players. However, 2 months had gone by and Full Tilt Poker still had refused to pay back the US customers like they had promised. Alderney Gaming Control Commission suspended their license, and Full Tilt was again temporarily shut down. There were accusations that Full Tilt Poker had been using funds deposited by players to meet operating costs, and that they were not paying customers back because they did not have the funds to do so. These accusations left players wondering if they would ever receive the money owed to them, and as you might imagine, they were furious. It was estimated that Full Tilt Poker owed over $300 million in player funds, with at least half of that being owed to US customers. After a further investigation, the DOJ accused Chris Ferguson, Howard Lederer, and Ray Bitar of defrauding US players by paying themselves dividends from the money that players had deposited to their personal accounts. Big players like Tom Dwan were left furious. Tom discussed how he was largely affected by Full Tilt's action on Fox News. It was clear to him that Full Tilt Poker was no longer to be associated with, and many global news sites were starting to call it a Ponzi scheme. Phil Ivey filed a lawsuit against Full Tilt Poker in 2012 for breaching their contract. He claims to have sued them to help innocent players who lost money during the scandal exposed on Black Friday, but speculation led to believe that this was done for more selfish reasons. Check the link in the description to know more about the $150 million lawsuit by Phil Ivey. Ray Bitar admitted to have put aside $24 million worth of stolen goods under his name in a foreign bank account. He was charged on accounts of money laundering and bank fraud and was sentenced to up to 65 years in prison. However, less than 2 years later, he was released on a $40 million bail as he wasn't expected to live more than a few years due to ongoing heart conditions. Full Tilt announced that they were going to sell the company if the right buyer came along. Group Bernard Tapie and Jack Binion were both interested parties, but neither company had enough funds to cover all of Full Tilt Poker's obligations. In 2012, it was announced that PokerStars was going to pay a fine to settle their case with the Department of Justice. Two items were of particular note. Firstly, the fine they agreed to pay was massive, which was over $750 million. Also, PokerStars negotiated the payout of all Full Tilt Poker players in return for the database and assets of the firm. Players rejoiced that their balances were going to be returned to them and the site was going to reopen for players outside the US. Beginning in April of 2014, affected players began to finally receive compensation. Garden City Group, a legal administration company, began to send out rounds of payments every few months. The final round of these payments were administered in October of 2016 with a total of $114 million paid out. This total still falls short of the estimated figure of $160 million owed to players by Full Tilt. Full Tilt's online poker room relaunched under PokerStars management as a standalone product in November of 2012. In May 2016, the Full Tilt brand name was merged into the PokerStars poker client. Howard Lederer, after a couple of years in hiding, held an exclusive interview to set the record straight on the events leading up to Black Friday.
As an owner of Full Tilt Poker, I take full responsibility for what happened. What happened wasn't right, and it caused a lot of pain, and that wasn't right. And for that, I'm truly sorry.
The response to the interview was less than favorable. Lederer seemed to win back no friends in the wake of this lengthy apology. Chris Ferguson also spent many years out of the public eye. However, he found himself back at the tables by 2016. In fact, he played well enough in the tournaments to win WSOP Player of the Year title. The rise and fall of Full Tilt Poker opened the eyes of many people both inside and outside the industry. The branding and approach to growth were both wise and foolish. While the strategy seemed sound in design, the costs associated would be too much for the company to bear in the long term. Number 2. The Ultimate Bet Poker Scam. The online poker world has seen its fair shares of ups and downs since its inception in the late 1990s, and one of the biggest scandals to hit the poker industry involved one of the largest poker sites, Ultimate Bet. This site had a series of missteps along the way, but still managed to compete with the largest competitors until 2008 when the House of Cards toppled over. This is the rise and fall of Ultimate Bet. The genesis of Ultimate Bet came from two people in the Pacific Northwest, Greg Pearson and John Carl, who started a software company called IE Logic back in the late 1990s. The software was originally designed to be a gaming software for a massive multiplayer online game of the role-playing variety. Pearson was a poker player, and during his trip to Las Vegas, he came to a known poker pro, Russ Hamilton. Hamilton, a World Series of Poker champion, convinced Pearson that he was using his software for the wrong purpose, and soon after that, the makings of Ultimate Bet were on the table. Russ Hamilton used his network of poker pros to start spreading the word about the impending launch of the site, wanting to use as many of them as possible as walking billboards for the new venture. One of the first players to come aboard as a sponsored pro and potential investor was none other than Phil Hellmuth. Hellmuth was himself a WSOP main event champion and also one of the most recognizable players on the planet. In 2001, Ultimate Bet was born and licensed by the Kahnawake Gaming Commission. In addition to online play, Ultimate Bet hosted the World Poker Tour's Aruba Poker Classic for 4 years. There are conflicting stories with how the Ultimate Bet super user cheating tool came into existence, or more specifically, why it came into existence. What was agreed upon though is that only a small number of high-level connected people with Ultimate Bet knew about the tool at all, and the story they spun to get the tool created would ultimately lead to the worst cheating scandal in online poker history. Russ Hamilton told people he believed there was a high-stakes player cheating in his online poker room. Russ Hamilton asked Greg Pearson to have his team develop a tool that would allow him to see whole cards and catch the cheater. Greg Pearson then had his team create this tool. However, an internal source involved with Ultimate Bet at the time said that a few of the higher-ups there believed there could be some potential moral consequences in even creating such tool. Because of this, a delay was put into place from 30 seconds to 5 minutes in length to ensure that the tool couldn't eventually be manipulated for active, real-time use. It was agreed upon by upper management that there would be no version updates to this tool, effectively making it obsolete and unusable when Ultimate Bet software was updated. However, Russ Hamilton came back to Greg more determined to catch the cheater on the site and asked for the tool to be updated without a delay. Greg hired an independent contractor to update the tool without a delay, something that internally came to be known as going into God mode. The tool could not be used on the same computer that someone was using. Someone else would need to log into Ultimate Bet and turn the tool on. That person could then see all hole cards on the site and then feed the information as the player played. Of course, it's very possible someone could set up two computers side by side and just look at the hole cards on one monitor while playing on the other. Whatever the case may be, Russ Hamilton had access to this tool. Greg Pearson knew it was developed and being used by Russ, and starting around May of 2004, it started being used not to catch cheats on Ultimate Bet, but to actually cheat players on the site. Two basic patterns formed as to how Russ Hamilton cheated. First, Russ Hamilton almost brazenly would contact a poker pro or business associate to play him heads up on Ultimate Bet. Before Full Tilt Poker became the place for nosebleed action, Ultimate Bet was where the biggest online cash games were played, so getting unsuspecting pros to his site was not difficult. If a pro was cash-strapped, no problem. Hamilton would transfer a player money to battle heads up, then win that money outright. This is what happened to Mike Matusow, who had gone on record about Russ Hamilton cheating him.
I want him in jail because of what he's done to me. This man would call me to play him head up. All the money I won when I won the 05 World Series main event, I gave all to Russ to put on UB while he was playing me head up and stealing it from me.
Prahlad Friedman was Tom Dwan before Tom Dwan arrived. Friedman was the first online poker god, and then Russ Hamilton cleaned him out. What happened to Prahlad fits pattern number 2, where Russ Hamilton had anonymous accounts created for him, which he then used to eviscerate the bankroll of people like Prahlad, known online at the time as Spirit Rock and Mahatma. Other pros discussed the psychological damage Russ's cheating caused them. Watching their bankroll get demolished playing a style of game that had won them millions had a long-term effect on their future results. These players ended up trying to fix leaks in their game that did not even exist.
It's not so much what he stole from me, it's what it did to me mentally. The fact that I was the most feared no-limit poker player in the world, and now I have no heart at all. Now I play so tight and solid, and I'm afraid to pull the trigger because I'm always afraid of getting called.
Russ Hamilton used Carolyn Hike, who was individually mostly responsible for creating cheating accounts, changing usernames, moving money, and processing withdrawals. In total, approximately 23 accounts and 117 usernames were established and linked to cheating, and almost $22 million were stolen from players. The way money was flowing in the early and less regulated online poker days, most people didn't think twice to question where these large sums of transfers were coming from. Why bother? Life was good, poker was booming, and people were getting rich and greedy. Eli Bajayo was a friend of Russ in Costa Rica and an occasional circuit player with a number of cashes in the late 90s. Like many friends of Hamilton, Eli was cheated by one of Russ's super user accounts. But Eli had a teenage nephew, Chaim Bajayo, who who unknowingly became a central figure in the cheating scandal. At Russ's request, Carolyn Hike set up an account in Haim's name. This account came to be known as Neo Neo. With the Absolute Poker scandal blowing up in the late 2007, online railbirds and 2+2 forum posters were paying more attention to unusual activity on poker sites. And there was almost no poker account with more unusual activity than Neo Neo. A 2+2 post was created discussing how some players on the high-stakes tables of Ultimate Bet were winning at an unusually high rate, playing less than optimal strategies. Specifically, forum posters Trampoline began reviewing their hand histories.
One of the top guys on here is the person who's screaming for blood. It's Trampoline. Trampoline was taken for 177 G's.
Under examination, they determined that Neo Neo, the 13-year-old wonder kid, had managed to win over $300,000 in just 3,000 hands. From there, mathematician and poker pro Michael Josem created a chart comparing Neo Neo's results against a large sample size of what would be considered normal accounts. Neo Neo's win rate was tantamount to winning a 1 in a million lottery on 4 consecutive days. Sleuths like Nat Aram on 2+2 continued to dig up dirt, and what they found was increasingly similar to what Prahlad Friedman experienced with Hamilton's second pattern of cheating. A new account would pop up, that account would crush it for a few sessions, and then that account would essentially never be heard from again. Then the same account would change usernames, reappear under a new handle, crush it for a few sessions, and then go away. The online poker community was buzzing with mountains of proof that something shady was going on at Ultimate Bet. The cheating was being facilitated by a super user account. That account was named Audit Monster 2. Audit Monster 2 would observe tables without playing the game. The observer could see all the cards dealt to all the players at the table. This account would tell the cheating player all of the holdings at the table held by other players. There were a handful of times when the cheats would call a small bet and lose to try and cover their tracks. On March 6, 2008, Ultimate Bet finally made a public announcement stating that they were investigating the cheating claims. This included the deletion of one of the most obvious cheating accounts, Neo Neo. Further research showed that Neo Neo and another cheating account, No Paddles, had their usernames changed by Ultimate Bet support. Other accounts were closed or had their usernames changed immediately after the cheating scandal broke. It was obvious that insiders at Ultimate Bet either facilitated what was going on or were the cheats themselves. In May of 2008, Ultimate Bet admitted that insider cheating had occurred. The company stated that they would issue refunds to players that were cheated. While some players did receive funds, many players felt that they were either shortchanged or never paid at all when their money was due. Ultimate Bet stated that $22.1 million was paid to players that were cheated over the years. The commission fined the company $1.5 million and let them continue to operate, thus triggering a mass exodus of players from the site. In June of 2008, Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet merged their player bases. The Absolute Poker software was then used for the new network. It was eventually discovered that the money that was paid out to victims came out of the players' deposits. This money would end up lost when Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet had most of their assets seized by the US government during Black Friday. Before the government seized an estimated $10 million on Black Friday, the company only had about $15 million in cash to cover about $54 million in player deposits. 8 super user victims filed lawsuits against Ultimate Bet in an attempt to recover stolen funds in January of 2011. The plaintiffs alleged that they were owed about $1.7 million in funds stolen from them during the years of cheating. The lawsuit went nowhere as Black Friday exposed Ultimate Bet's lack of liquidity that left them unable to pay even if a judgment could have been secured. A 3-hour audio tape containing a conversation between Hamilton, Pearson, and 2 company attorneys emerged in 2013. On the tape were discussions about the specifics of the cheating and the various ways it could be covered up. Travis McCarr, Russ Hamilton's longtime personal computer expert, secretly recorded the conversations in an attempt to protect his own reputation.
The only way to satisfy these geeks supposed to send them their entire hand histories. You can't do that. You cannot send hand histories out.
He released the tape as part of a large data dump that included screenshots, photos of the cheating accounts, and details as to how Russ Hamilton was able to bypass the site's fraud prevention software. The tape proved that the extent of the scandal was much larger than originally thought. In 2017, the Money Laundering and Asset Recovery section of the Department of Justice approved the first round of payments to Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet's affected customers. A third-party facilitator of these payments, Garden City Group, reported that nearly 7,400 petitioners will receive almost $34 million from funds seized on Black Friday. While these payments did not cover all of the affected players' losses, it was at least something. Russ Hamilton never spent a day in prison from this scandal. Number 3. The Absolute Poker Scam. The history of this poker site is rather dark, and in 2007, they experienced a scandal that shook the poker world. Our story begins when 6 fraternity brothers began playing online poker while attending the University of Montana. They soon realized that operating an online poker site would be a lot more lucrative than being one of the players. So, they decided to launch their own website. Scott Tom got funding from his father Phil Tom and worked with his fraternity brothers to find a software development company and eventually worked with a South Korean company to design their poker site, which was to be known as Absolute Poker. Absolute Poker officially launched in 2003. After receiving a license from the Kahnawake Gaming Commission, Scott Tom and his friends moved to Costa Rica to manage the company. When Absolute Poker's software was in development, many test accounts were created to make sure the program is working correctly. One of these test accounts, known as number 363, could see the whole cards at any table. This test account could not be used to play in real money games. It was only used for development purposes to see that the pots are distributed correctly. This was one of the first accounts ever opened in Absolute Poker, making it very likely that the person in control of this account has somewhat intimate ties with the company. 4 people in different parts of the United States open up accounts at Absolute Poker. The accounts are Grey Cat, Steamroller, Double Drag, and Pot Ripper. They play in Absolute Poker for a bit, but they don't do well and their accounts are not logged in for many months. These are actual and real players. Remember these names because they play a key role in how the cheating took place, which will be revealed later. In September of 2006, Congress passed the UIGEA. Private companies like PokerStars and Full Tilt Poker chose to continue accepting US players. Absolute Poker was still a private company at that point because it had not gone public yet, so it continued operating. Ultimate Bet was in a precarious position. It was a public company and the price of its stocks were dropping dramatically. However, the majority of its customers were from the US, so they did not have the option of pleasing shareholders by focusing on non-US customers. Greg Pearson, the owner of Ultimate Bet, had provided anti-fraud software to Scott Tom when Absolute Poker had been launched. Absolute Poker quickly agreed to take over operations from Ultimate Bet site through a complicated merger that involved the Kahnawake Gaming Commission. It also provided Absolute Poker with massive revenue potential as the operator was one of the largest poker sites in the country. In 2007, a major software update was in process. The company hires programmers from many areas, including Costa Rica. The villain of our story comes across account number 363 with whole card access, and seeing the massive potential of cheating players with access to their whole cards, he hatches a plan. In August of 2007, a player by the name of Pot Ripper won the weekly $1,000 tournament at Absolute Poker, and he did that with amazing fashion. He ran through the tournament, folding at the precise time he needed and winning every showdown. Some opponents became suspicious of how this player was playing. He just seemed to know what the opponent's whole cards were. The suspicious players provided examples of these hands which were so outrageous that virtually all serious poker players were convinced that cheating had occurred. Forum members uncovered the unusually high win rates of 3 other players, namely Grey Cat, Steamroller, and Double Drag. They were beating the best high-stakes regulars on the site at an incredible rate. On September 13th, 2007, Pot Ripper was in an intense heads-up battle with another player whose username was Crazy Marco, aka Marco Johnson. In the final hand, Pot Ripper went all in after the turn card and won the hand with a 10 high. Crazy Marco, who had a 9 high with a flush draw, was shocked that Pot Ripper could go all in with a 10 high. It was not a strong enough hand for that kind of action, especially given the $1,000 buy-in for the particular tournament. Crazy Marco contacted Absolute Poker to ask for a hand history and complained that he suspected Pot Ripper had cheated. Absolute Poker claimed that there were no indications of cheating from Pot Ripper, but they sent Crazy Marco a file with the hand histories anyway. When he looked at the file, Crazy Marco had no idea what he was looking at. It was a jumbled mess of code that he could not decipher. At the time, Crazy Marco did not know that the file that Absolute Poker had sent him did not contain the usual hand history, but instead sent a file that contained all sorts of private information that the poker side would never release. The file contained every player's hole cards, observations of the table, and even the IP addresses of every player playing. This information was later placed into a hand replayer and uploaded into a YouTube video. Anyone with the slightest poker aptitude could see that Pot Ripper had knowledge of all the hole cards. Poker players went to work analyzing the data, not the hand histories themselves, but other, more subtle information contained in the file. What these players noticed was that, starting with the third hand of the tournament, there was an observer who watched every subsequent hand played by the cheater. Interestingly, the cheater folded the first two hands before this observer showed up, then did not fold a single hand before the flop for the next 20 minutes, and then folded his hand pre-flop when another player has a pair of kings as hole cards. This sort of cheating went on throughout the tournament. The players turned their attention to this observer. 2+2 Forum reports that Pot Ripper's email address is scott@riveraltd.com. They traced the observer's IP address and account name to the same set of servers that host Absolute Poker, and also to a particular individual named Scott Tom, who was part owner of Absolute Poker. About 2 hours after the result of this investigation is revealed on the internet, the DNS information of riveraltd.com is deleted. Absolute Poker claims Scott Tom has not been employed by the company for over a year. After the connection to Scott Tom became evident, Absolute Poker finally addressed the cheating concern. They issued a statement that the incident had been a case of a disgruntled employee who hacked the system to show that it could be done. The employee was attempting to frame Scott Tom, but Absolute Poker maintained that Scott was not involved. They claimed that the cheating had only occurred for approximately 40 days, and they issued $1.6 million in refunds to players that had been affected. But that may have only been 10% of what Scott Tom and other cheaters got away with during their years of seeing opponents' hole cards at the table. On January 16, 2008, the Kahnawake Gaming Commission conducted an investigation and fined the company $500,000. Neither investigation named the employee that was responsible for the cheating. So how was this scam pulled off, you might be asking? Unbeknownst to players, Absolute Poker had already cut a secret deal with the cheater. The company agreed not to release his name in return for a full and detailed explanation of how he cheated, according to company officials and other interviews. The cheater found inactive accounts at Absolute Poker and changed the password to these accounts at server level. He opens up test account number 363 at a separate computer, which allows him to see all the hole cards at the table. He then gets his family and friends to cash out his winnings. The way he does this is after he gets a big amount of cash at the poker tables, he plays against his relatives and buddies and loses all the cash to them. This was how the money was cheated and moved to avoid detection for so long. September 2007 comes, and as the money piles up, so does their ego and greed. Other poker players make comments in chat that they suspect that there is cheating and collusion involved. The cheater logs in as Double Drag and then loses every hand intentionally intentionally in order to cover up his trail. But alas, it was too late and the scam by that time was uncovered. In April of 2011, the US Department of Justice indicted Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet. Scott Tom and his brother Brent Beckley were personally indicted for their work involving Absolute Poker. Scott Tom fled to Antigua to avoid indictment. Brent Beckley received 14 months in prison in 2012. The federal government seized no more than 10% of the total amount that it should have had on deposit. Absolute Poker players had about $53 million in combined balances. The seizure should have left Absolute Poker with at least $48 million. However, during the time of seizure, it only had $3 million. Part of the reason so much money was missing is that Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet used player deposits to repay fraud victims. It never forced Tom Scott to repay the stolen funds. The site was unable to continue doing business. In October of 2011, it finally turned out the lights. In 2017, Scott Tom turned himself in. He was released on a $500,000 bond. The Pot Ripper account was eventually traced to the site's corporate offices in Costa Rica and was thought to have belonged to Absolute Poker's Director of Operations, AJ Green, as well as reportedly Scott Tom's best friend. The US DOJ used settlement money from Black Friday to refund players who lost their funds when Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet were seized. Number 4. The Lock Poker Scam. In the turbulent world of online poker, few stories are as notorious as that of Lock Poker. Behind the scenes of its flashy promotions and high-stakes contests, a darker truth began to emerge. Lock Poker was embroiled in scandal after scandal, culminating in accusations of fraud and cheating. Join us as we delve into the rise and fall of Lock Poker, a cautionary tale of deception and broken promises. Lock Poker first came into existence during mid-2008 and had a great marketing staff and business plan. It launched on the Cake Poker Network and in April of 2010 moved to the Merge Gaming Network. Unfortunately, it appeared that Lock Poker was never anything but a scam. In the spring of 2011, the online poker world buzzed with excitement when Lock Poker teamed up with Bluff Magazine to launch a high-stakes contest. The premise was simple. Whichever player earned the most money on Lock's platform during the month of April would win a lavish prize package, including a coveted seat at the $10,000 WSOP main event. However, beneath all the excitement lay a glaring flaw in the contest's design. The sole criterion for winning was the total amount of money won during the month of April, which opened the door for potential manipulation. It was all too tempting for players to engage in chip dumping, where one player could intentionally lose chips to another and then share the prize. The winner was not just any participant, but a Lock Poker pro named Jose Macedo, whose victory was marred by blatant cheating. Instead of gradually accumulating winnings, Macedo waited until the last day of April to engage in a high-stakes PLO match against an unknown account, securing over $100,000 in a single night. His opponent, who lost a significant sum to him, was a newcomer to the high-limit games, raising questions about the legitimacy of the match. It seemed as though the money had magically appeared in the opponent's account, suggesting a setup. This last-minute win barely edged him past the legitimate second-place contender who had worked diligently throughout the month. Macedo later admitted to cheating in the contest, but at the time, he professed innocence. Despite the obvious signs of cheating, Lock Poker awarded Macedo the prize without question. This decision was seen as willful ignorance, as Lock Poker seemed more interested in the publicity of having one of their pros win the contest and getting featured on the cover of Bluff Magazine. Lock Poker only disqualified him reluctantly after facing public outrage. Even then, they released a misleading statement suggesting he was disqualified for minor violations of the contest rules. Although Macedo won enough money from his own IP to have legitimately won the challenge, the unfortunate fact remains that breaking the rules is strictly disallowed. Jennifer Larson, Lock Poker CEO. Jennifer Larson twisted the narrative, portraying it as a legitimate win tarnished by a minor technicality, implying that Jose fairly won $100,000 but was disqualified for letting a friend use his account to win a small additional amount. This incident should have been a major warning sign about Lock Poker and its management. Trust in this site was severely undermined, and as the story unfolded, it became clear that this was just the beginning of their troubles. April 2011 was a tumultuous month for Lock Poker, marking by both the ill-fated Bluff Magazine Challenge and the seismic shift in the online poker landscape known as Black Friday. Major poker sites like Full Tilt, Ultimate Bet, and PokerStars were forced out of the US market, leaving a void that the Merge network, including Lock Poker, quickly filled. US poker players, suddenly without their usual platforms, flocked to Merge skins, eager for a place to play. Lock Poker seized this opportunity by offering a promotion that set it apart from other Merge skins. The network had a rule capping player rakeback at 35% to prevent poaching, which is the act of luring players from one skin to another with better rakeback offers. However, Lock boldly defied this rule by advertising a bonus rakeback of up to 20% on top of the standard 35%. Many grinders seeking the best deal chose Lock Poker over other Merge skins, or even switched from competing skins to take advantage of the extra rakeback. But when May 1st, 2011 arrived, the reality of the promotion was vastly different from what had been advertised. The first payout, due in May, was delayed by 6 months. When payments finally came, they had an absurd catch. To withdraw any of the bonus rakeback, players had to complete a playthrough requiring between 40 times to 160 times the bonus amount, and it had to be wagered in the casino, not the poker room. The structure of the playthrough requirement was designed to be almost impossible to complete without going broke. Worse still, the bonus itself was sticky, meaning it could never be withdrawn. If a player miraculously completed the playthrough and turned a $1,000 bonus into $1,500, they could only withdraw the $500, not the original $1,000 bonus. Players who switched to Lock for the extra rakeback found themselves cheated, as did the skins they left behind. Lock Poker's response to the backlash was to blame the Merge network, claiming that Merge had intervened early only to stop the promotion. However, instead of ending the promotion and compensating the players, Lock Poker stalled, avoiding accountability and leaving players without their promised compensation. 9 months later, players were still waiting for the money they were promised. Most of those who attempted the impossible playthrough requirements had already busted their accounts, rendering the so-called extra rakeback worthless. In a US court of law, Lock Poker's action would likely be deemed false advertising and fraud, resulting in a legal victory for the affected players. But because Lock Poker operates overseas, it shielded them from such legal repercussions, leaving players without recourse. As the saga unfolded, it became clear that Lock Poker's troubles were far from over. In spring of 2011, Lock Poker found itself embroiled in yet another scandal, this time involving one of its newly signed pros, Tim West. This incident further highlighted the company's ongoing struggles with integrity and transparency. Tim West, a professional player, had sold pieces of himself for the $10,000 Harrah's Rincon tournament to several members of the 2+2 Poker Forum. Midway through the tournament, he built up a massive stack and suddenly regretted selling so much of himself. Instead of just accepting his poor timing, he pulled a shady move. He claimed that he had accidentally oversold and needed to refund 13% of the action, effectively canceling those pieces after he had a strong shot at a big score. Predictably, this caused an uproar with an entire thread on 2+2 exposing the situation. Rather than admitting fault, Tim West doubled down, acting like a self-righteous jerk, throughout the discussion. This incident raised questions about Lock Poker's choice of representatives. However, more controversies were yet to come. In June of 2011, a player at Lock Poker uncovered a deeply concerning security issue. His password was plainly visible in the Java source code of the website. This meant that his password was also stored in plain text on Lock Poker's servers, potentially accessible to any Lock employee with server access. Moreover, this flaw meant that passwords were being transmitted unencrypted over the internet. Upon discovering this issue, the user promptly reported it to Lock Poker, who assured them they would be addressed. However, nearly 10 months later, the security flaw persisted unresolved. In May 2012, Lock Poker launched a new network called Revolution Gaming. It turns out this was just another lie. In reality, Lock Poker had bought the Cake Poker network, which was renamed Revolution Gaming. Payouts began to decrease once Lock Poker shifted to Revolution. By mid-2013, player payouts virtually halted altogether. In October of 2013, Lock Poker suddenly transitioned to its own network, introducing entirely new software never seen before in online poker. This move frustrated players, as the site still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to players but seemed more focused on investing in a new network instead of paying its debts. Player traffic dwindled on the new network, resulting in the lack of new deposits, but extravagant spending by the company's management continued. According to Lock Poker's former director of social media and affiliate marketing, Shane Bridges, the management team were buying $500 bottles of wine with every single meal. The Lock Poker executives took first-class flights and stayed in insane 5-star boutique hotels. While many helped spread the word about the risks of depositing and playing at Lock Poker, the most credit belongs to 2plus2 forum user I Has the Nuts. He tirelessly compiled a list of unpaid players and launched the Lock Poker payout scam thread on August 6, 2013, which had since accumulated over 3,800 posts from concerned players. By exposing the millions in unpaid player funds, estimated by some to be around $15 million, I Has the Nuts played a crucial role in bringing down Lock Poker and preventing future depositors from losing their money. Lock Poker cancelled withdrawal requests that had been lingering for months and contacted affected players with an email reading, "Please note that player transfers and winnings derived from player transfers are not eligible for payouts. If you require further assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us." However, any attempts to reach management or customer service were futile, as emails, phone calls, and letters went unanswered.
Ladies and gentlemen, you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If there are any questions, you may direct them to that brick wall.
As a result, any money deposited on the platform was considered lost and unrecoverable. This issue had plagued the site for years, yet some players continued to fall for their bonus schemes. In April 2015, Lock Poker closed its doors and turned off the lights without a written warning or explanation. Lock Poker is an example of a site that can be bankrupt but still operate for years. It also shows that a poker room that gives away too many promotions has no chance of surviving. Number 5. The Bot Farm Corporation. In the high-stakes world of online poker, Farewell has earned a reputation as one of the most formidable players. Known for his icy demeanor during games, Farewell wasn't afraid to speak his mind in poker forums, often calling out what he saw as nonsense in the community. In 2013, a player by the name of Vyacheslav Karpov caught his attention. Karpov was notorious for his wild stories in Russian poker forums, boasting about card tricks he had learned from gypsies. Unable to hold back, Farewell entered the chat room and accused Karpov of spinning fairy tales. He declared that Karpov did not know how to play poker, setting off a public feud. Karpov responded with a bold challenge, a heads-up match in Limit Texas Hold'em, which was Farewell's specialty. Known as the King of Limit, Farewell confidently accepted the duel set to take place on PokerStars. However, what seemed like a surefire victory for Farewell turned into a nightmare. Pot after pot went to Karpov, and after 400 hands, Farewell found himself down $20,000. Farewell could not shake the feeling that Karpov had used something more than just poker skill. While he couldn't prove it, he suspected Karpov had employed a poker bot, a software that had been evolving for decades but had recently become sophisticated enough to challenge even top human players. As Farewell reflected on his loss to Karpov, he realized he might have been one of the first top-tier players to fall victim to this new breed of poker bot, a sign that the game he loved was rapidly evolving for better or worse. Meanwhile, whispers in the poker community pointed to massive bot farms in places like Siberia, where programmers were developing sophisticated software to beat human competitors. One such operation, known as Bot Farm Corporation, was rumored to function like an international corporation, complete with training programs and an HR department. These bots, it seemed, were designed by mathematical prodigies from Russia, often from cities like Omsk, where students trained in game theory, probability, and economics. Fueled by the poker boom and low local wages, these collectives trained tirelessly, substituting human players with AI systems that could play millions of hands and optimize strategies faster than any human being. By 2012, the group had built what was likely the world's most advanced poker playing software. They entered the annual computer poker competition under the name Neo Poker Lab, competing against leading research hubs like Carnegie Mellon and the University of Alberta. Neo placed in several categories and won the heads-up contest, pushing the vaunted Alberta bot into second place. Despite their success, the group's attempt to commercialize their technology failed. By 2015, University of Alberta announced that their bot, Cepheus, had solved two-player Limit Hold'em, claiming it was unbeatable. Reading the news from Russia, the Omsk crew was a little annoyed that they never got a rematch. But they had long since stopped bothering with scientific posturing. Poker isn't really poker without money at stake, and the Russian bot farmers knew that better than anyone. Before the development of Cepheus, poker sites did not take the threat of botting too seriously. By 2015, websites began adopting more sophisticated security measures to detect and ban bots, even though using software to play poker was more about cheating than breaking the law. Poker sites quickly adapted, forbidding bots in their terms of use and shutting down accounts suspected of using them. But identifying bots wasn't easy. The top professional players played nearly perfect, so filtering for win rates or play styles wasn't always enough. Early bot detection methods involved monitoring chat boxes and tracking cursor movements, but this only pushed bot developers to adapt. A group of Siberians, for instance, began hiring programmers to refine their bots, simulating human-like mouse movements, generating realistic chat, and randomizing decision time. This led poker sites to dig deeper, analyzing gameplay patterns to spot anomalies. In Omsk, Russia, where a large-scale botting operation was thriving, this increased scrutiny became a problem. To counteract this, the group began outsourcing bot operations to partners who would pay for access to the sophisticated bot software known internally as the Brain. These partners function like franchisees, setting up offices, hiring employees, and recruiting real people to open clean accounts for the bots to use. Bot Farm Corporation's bots could be operated fully automatically or with human assistance to avoid detection. This strategy worked well in online poker tournaments where players might be asked to verify their identities via video. When caught, farms could shut down and restart under new identities. Leaked internal chats from the corporation revealed the vast scope of this operation, with over 600 operators running bot accounts across the globe. Many of the initial partners were Russian poker players or bloggers who had heard about the Bot Farm Corporation and had a loyal online following to supply clean accounts. Among them was Vyacheslav Karpov, a formidable rival of Farewell. Karpov's operation was so extensive that Bot Farm Corporation classified him as a premium user, granting him access to the advanced software known as the Brain during his 2013 showdown against Farewell. By 2018, Bot Farm Corporation shifted strategies again, opting to sell their software as an app rather than working directly with partners. This allowed the group to focus on developing better AI without worrying about constant detection from poker sites. Some partners even turned into distributors, spreading the software far and wide under brands like NZT Poker, which boasted tens of thousands of users. At its peak, Bot Farm Corporation was making over $10 million annually. Meanwhile, the poker industry faced a dilemma. While players hated bots, poker sites benefited from the liquidity they provided. Bots keeps games running around the clock, ensuring there were always tables to join. Alex Scott, president of the World Poker Tour, noted that while sites have rules against bots, they have little incentive to crack down on them as long as they keep generating revenue through rake. Recognizing this opportunity, in 2020, Bot Farm Corporation launched a company called Deep Play that claimed to provide AI-powered solutions for a range of industries, distancing itself from its roots in the Siberian poker bot empire. Their bots were used by online poker clubs to keep tables active, and the company even offered anti-bot security services to protect these clubs from competitors. Former employees revealed that Deep Play bots were sometimes set to play poorly, ensuring that human players won enough to keep them engaged. Deep Play would either charge a fee for this technology or take a share of the increased revenue. It remains unclear whether any of Deep Play's clients were aware they were dealing with an offshoot of one of the largest cheating operations in poker history. Despite extensive inquiries, no poker club or traditional website openly admitted to using internal bots or having a relationship with Deep Play. When asked about the ethics, one executive described it as a complicated question, acknowledging that other platforms also used bots. The top 5 poker sites either denied any connection to this practice, declined to comment, or did not respond at all. Today, the average poker enthusiast cannot be certain whether their online opponent is a human or a machine. Even on major platforms, game security is not foolproof. This is an arms race against very motivated individuals, PokerStars noted in a 2023 blog post. At a recent tournament with a $12.5 million prize pool run by Winning Poker Network, the second place was disqualified mid-event on suspicion of botting. Despite their reputation as poker's biggest cheaters, the leaders of the Bot Farm Corporation began exploring ways to reshape the game for the future. In 2023, a group of former members, calling themselves the Neo-Pokerists, shared their vision, explaining their belief that poker needed to evolve. The current state of online poker, they argued, was unsustainable. Too many pros and bots were competing for a shrinking pool of casual players, driving them away from the game. Their solution was a matchmaking system that would pair players of similar skill levels, creating fairer contests. While they had built one of the largest cheating operations in history, they believed they could also help save the game. Whether the poker world will accept this new vision remains to be seen, but one thing is for clear: the OMS poker machine is far from over.